Hello and welcome to Wrestling at Random. I'm Jeremy Deemer.
And I am Adam Summers.
This is the podcast where every week we review a classic pro wrestling event from a streaming service.
And that classic pro wrestling event could be a major arena card from the territory days. It could be a television special, a home video with original matches, or in the case of this week's podcast, the final pay-per-view event from World Championship Wrestling.
That's right. This is WCW GREED from March 18th, 2001. Now, let's stay there in March of 2001. A lot went down when WCW finally met its demise. You can go to the beginning of January 2001, where Eric Bischoff and a group of investors called Fusion Media Ventures, they announced their intentions to purchase WCW. WCW had been losing money and had to be sold as AOL was merging with Time Warner, who owned WCW at the time. They were prepared to pay $48 million for the company, contingent on the contract putting in place a multi-year agreement where Turner Networks would continue to carry WCW programming. CEO of Turner Broadcasting, Jamie Kellner, made the decision to cancel all pro wrestling programming effective with Nitro on March 26th, 2001 in Panama City, Florida.
And just as a quick side note, it's not as if the ratings for WCW Monday Nitro at that point were absolutely awful in comparison to where they had been before. They certainly weren't great, and in comparison to Monday Night Raw, they weren't great. But they were still like very solid for what a network like that would be doing at that time. So this wasn't necessarily a ratings driven decision.
No, Bischoff and Fusion had some time to work out a deal with another television company. Like you mentioned, they had enough ratings to get those meetings with other broadcasters. But Bischoff and Fusion officially backed out of the deal for good on March 20th. 2 days after this pay-per-view we're about to review, March 20th, 2001.
Which is wild as well, because you read in the years later, and I'm not sure if you were going to get to this, but some of the plans that Bischoff had with Fusion for WCW are pretty interesting. The idea of shutting down the company for a few months, restarting with a pay-per-view called The Big Bang, which there's actually artwork out there for the ads for that pay-per-view. The ads never ran, but the artwork was created for it. And a lot of the idea was going to be that it was going to be built around younger wrestlers. There's a line of thought that Joey Styles was going to be brought in with ECW having just closed, was going to be brought in to be the play-by-play guy. They were going to build around Rob Van Dam as one of the big stars. So they did have definitive ideas. They just, they weren't able to put them in place because they didn't close the deal.
That's correct. They were unable to land a television deal with Fox after a long set of negotiations. So many things contributed to the ultimate demise of WCW. There are literally books written about it, so we're not going to go into it here, but definitely go read those. But
yeah, read The Death of WCW and Nitro, I would say, are the two definitive books detailing the downward spiral and eventual death of the company.
But yeah, the way the story of the demise ended is with a sale at the end of March 2001. So Bischoff backs out of the deal on March 20th, 2 days after this pay-per-view. By the end of the month, Vince McMahon and the WWF purchased the WCW assets for $4.2 million.
$4.2 million. Again, go back to, you said it was
January,
$48 million.
$48 million in January.
And there had also been, I believe, overtures earlier in that year or late the previous year from the WWF trying to buy WCW, and it was even more than what Bischoff ended up offering, and many multiples more than what they ended up purchasing basically the tape library for, as you mentioned.
Yeah, but without the television time slots on any network, only WWF made sense to purchase WCW and the assets.
And really, yeah, all the assets were at that point was the intellectual property and the tape library, because you weren't there was no, like you said, there was no TV slot. There was nothing really tangible there.
So going into this show came off like a group that had confidence that they were going to be purchased and probably by Bischoff and crew here. So they were going out. They did not make any mention. This was not presented like this was the final pay-per-view in the legacy of WCW.
Not like Monday Nitro, the final Nitro, which was presented as the series finale, and there was an air of finality to that broadcast, even before obviously the simulcast at the end of the show.
We open with a DDP video saying he's going to cutter Steiner, and we get the pyro in the arena, and we hear Tony Schiavone, and he says, quote, "If it's professional wrestling, then it must be greed." I don't know what that means.
I guess it's because everybody in wrestling is greedy and will stab each other in the back. I don't know. My thought is that a lot of the names that they had for these late stage WCW pay-per-views, Sin, Greed, and such, that those were names that were, I assume, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe someone will correct me, that those were names that were come up with during some part of the Vince Russo era. And those, Russo wasn't here at this point, but those names were, they just kind of stuck with them. But yeah, it's a little weird, and also that's juxtaposed with their tiny little baby Titantron that they have at the top of their tiny little baby entrance. Like you said, there's a little bit of pyro, and we're immediately told that we have an extra added bonus match. And oh boy, from a visual presentation, we talk about the Fashion Corner often on this podcast. It is Kwee, who is quite the character, taking on Jett, who I was very excited for you to get to see, Jeremy, because if you go back and listen to our November to Remember ECW 2000 podcast review, Easy Money is on that show, and I talk at some length about how Easy Money was in at the very end of WCW and was presented as this super innovative, high-flying babyface that was still wearing the same gross gear that Easy Money wore in ECW. So that's what we have here.
For some reason, this gear felt less gross.
Maybe
I don't know.
The entrance gear he didn't have, and he wasn't surrounded by Confederate currency, Chris Hamrick, and Julio De Niro and Elektra. Maybe that's part of it.
It's definitely still not great. Or maybe it was just I was blinded by Kwee's presentation as a whole. So
let's get into the presentation for both quickly. If you've never seen Easy Money before, Jason Jett here, that is Easy Money with his WCW name. All his move names have like wacky, like flying themes to them. And he's wearing yellow tights and then these like yellow, I guess you could call them like rubbery chaps that connect his tights to his boots. It's not, there's a reason that this look has not been replicated.
Never caught on.
Wrestling.
No, never caught on.
It never caught on. Whereas Kwee, he's a muscular guy. He has a balding hairline, but hair sticking up like 3 feet in the air. If you're one of the Big Audio Nightmare listeners, think of Sonata when Sonata very first arrived in New Japan Pro Wrestling and had that tall hair. And
the
then
first
he's
and
wearing...
last comparison between Sonata and Kwee.
And Kwee is wearing long pink baggy trunks.
Almost like genie pants.
Yes, it's Hammer pants meets the bottoms of medical scrubs, but pink. It is a look. And we are told that Easy Money, or as I should call him, Jason Jett here in WCW, just made his debut a couple days earlier on Thunder, and he defeated Alex Wright, who was in fact apparently in WCW in 2001.
Das Wunderkind.
Yeah, if I remember right, he had a very different look, a very different gimmick at that point. He had like a shaved head, except for like a black
Berlin
mohawk.
No, it was
yes, it was
post Berlin.
Post Berlin, but he had the same look and the same gear. And they make a point as this match is beginning about how WCW is all about opportunities for the young wrestlers, and we're often running on a match that, while it's not officially part of the cruiserweight division, it certainly feels like they are going for that hot cruiserweight opener sort of feel.
What a generic name, though, Jason Jett. It's like
It
the
is.
bottom of the creativity barrel here. Like,
Well, it seems as though he should have been teaming with Mark Starr on WCW Saturday Night in like 1992 with that name.
fun fact about young Jason Jett here: he was the last person ever to be signed to a WCW contract.
Oh wow! So yeah, he wasn't just because like we'll get into it later. Like AJ Styles was in the cruiserweight tag team tournament at this time, and actually I believe wrestled. He was on the last episode of WCW Thunder, but he was not under a contract. He was just there.
Yes, he was the last one to be signed to a WCW contract. Now, a little bit of the presentation here, as they showed the crowd, we will hear crowd sweetening throughout this show, and a lot of fake crowd noise because
at times it comes and goes. Like
it comes and goes. Yeah,
we hear it early, and then it goes away for a while, and then in like the big matches, they bring it back.
Yeah, and when they showed the building, you could see empty seats. This is in.
But it was a pretty good crowd. I mean,
it was the Jacksonville Jacksonville Coliseum. It drew 5,030 fans, which was about 3/4 full. And
it is also just interesting. I guess just for more symmetry between the companies. You know, people talk about All Elite Wrestling and them being on TNT, and the symmetry to WCW. Obviously, the Rhodes family connection. And then the fact that All Elite Wrestling, AEW, based out of Jacksonville, Florida, and here the final WCW pay-per-view took place in Jacksonville.
Kwee jumps Jett from behind before the bell, knocking him outside. They brawl outside the ring, and I immediately noticed how much space there was between the guardrail and the ring. There's like an extra foot. You can see that the mats on the outside, they don't even come close to being near the guardrail.
This almost felt like one of those old New Japan Tokyo Dome shows where they would have like the ring would be on the stage, and then like past the stage you'd have another 5 or 10 feet till the actual like guardrails for the fans. It was definitely not the normal WCW setup.
Jett fights back, hits a crossbody off the top all the way out to the floor, and back in the ring, Jett hooks him in a move that Scott Hudson, our announce team is Tony Schiavone and Scott Hudson here, and Hudson calls it a pendulum surfboard.
Yes, the pendulum of pain. It is one of the most visually disturbing moves in pro wrestling. I've watched some horrific Japanese death matches in my life, and I've not been as uncomfortable watching it as this move. Some guys have used it, but it certainly didn't catch on. If nothing else, it's just a weird looking move. It's like a like elevated, suspended reverse surfboard where you just are holding the guy and you swing him back and forth, but it's like, just weird.
Swinging between your legs, it's weird.
Yeah, it's an odd thing. We also had then an odd spot where there's a leapfrog right as the announcers are saying that Jason Jett looks like he's been in WCW for 10 years. He stumbles. And we get a very awkward looking moment where Kwee catches him with the clothesline.
Well, I was concerned he almost blew out a knee or something.
Yeah.
The way that he stumbled hitting in those ropes. I'm like, is he hurt or no? Just clumsy. And
yeah, at least in that moment. Then Kwee catches him, throws him over the top rope or from the apron, I should say, all the way over and to the floor
by his hair. He threw him over by his hair.
These guys were going hard here. That's the one thing that was exciting about this era of WCW, this like 3 months of 2001 where they were completely free of the Vince Russo era of WCW. The young guys that they were bringing in are some of the guys that had the more high flying guys that had for a while that hadn't been motivated. You saw that motivation come back, and these two guys were going pretty hard. Then comes the moment that you sent a short clip of that you took a video of from your screen and said, we need to gift this and have this be the image when we post about the show on social media. Kwee goes for a suicide dive through the ropes. Jason Jett moves, but Jett is standing so far away from where Kwee landed that if Jason Jett had not moved an inch and just stayed standing where he was, Kwee would have crashed and burned regardless. It is amazing.
Yes, he
Go
came
to
up.
our Twitter if you have not seen this.
Our Twitter or the Instagram, it's all there. He comes up so short on this dive that Jason Jett is not in the camera frame.
No,
So
no.
it looks
The
like
camera has to
Kwee
pan to
just jumps out and crashes and burns for no reason. You don't even know where his opponent is in this clip.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Then we get something that tells me that Matt Hardy was watching.
Yes.
Matt Hardy was watching this show, which by the craziness of the randomizer, if you're listening to the show in linear fashion, last week's podcast was about WWF Backlash 2001, which was some 5 weeks after this WCW show. And we talked about a spot in the three-way match that Jeff Hardy was in where he sort of gets backdropped as he's running towards his opponent, who's standing back first to the apron on the floor, gets tipped up, and then his entire body hits the ropes, and then he comes back with a DDT. We get that exact same spot here, although I will say done much more crisply by these two men in the opener for WCW here.
Yeah, as soon as I saw that move, I immediately just said, "Oh my gosh, I know exactly where Matt Hardy got that move from. He was watching the Greed pay-per-view." Yes.
And then we get another thing that feels like more symmetry between what was on TNT.
Oh, yes, the Afterburner.
The Afterburner, which is Hangman Page's Buckshot Lariat.
It's not similar to Hangman Page's Buckshot Lariat. It's exactly that move.
It is 100% that move. So I guess we now know what like a 5-year-old Hangman Page was watching on a Sunday evening in March of 2001 here. And then we get a standing moonsault from Jason Jett. So
he looked great. I think he looked great here.
I thought Jason Jett looked awesome here. He looked great in every appearance, his very brief run he had in WCW. And we'll obviously describe the rest of this match, but there's a few things that don't go perfectly in this match, but by and large, I loved this. I thought this was a really fun opener, and we'll get into more of it, but just want to get that in there in case I forget.
Yeah, no, I came in here, I see these two geeks come out, and I'm like, come on, WCW. And I was expecting, I still had aftertaste in my mouth from Bash at the Beach 2000, right? So I'm already with low expectations, and these guys came out in the opener and just, they put on a great match. This is one of my favorite matches of the show.
Yeah, this was of the now 32, I think, podcasts we've done. Again, if you're listening linearly, this is probably this is at least in the top third, if not higher than that, of opening matches that we've seen on shows that we've reviewed.
Like you mentioned, though, it wasn't all perfect. On the outside, Kwee tries to pin Jett on the floor, and the ref has to say, like, no. And I'm like, what is happening?
It did give a great moment for Tony to be able to tell us that, no, that stipulation was not added to the opener, but it has been added to the world title match coming up later.
Kwee erupts into Angry Allen, which is his Jekyll and Hyde persona, as Alan Funk was his previous name gimmick character. And
who was basically like one of those guys that was on in like the late stages of WCW Saturday Night, where they almost had a completely different roster than like Nitro or Thunder. He was one of those guys that was just on there all the time. But if you didn't watch Saturday Night, you would almost never see him.
Both men on the top rope. Jett goes for a powerbomb, but Kwee reverses it into a Rana in midair, and both men nearly broke their necks and died. This was horrifying. This was so terrifying.
It was absolutely terrifying. Again, they pulled it off.
They had no business pulling it off.
No, these two guys certainly didn't. Kwee in particular, and it looked dangerous. Because it was. It was visually impressive. We get a double count at this point. Kwee eventually gets over. Jett kicks out. Then Jason Jett goes for a tilt-a-whirl head scissors. Kwee just sits out and drops down with it, and we get my first Tony Schiavoneism of the show, where he calls it, quote, a face jam.
So Kwee on the outside. Jett asks the crowd to be quiet as he lays down in the ring playing possum. Kwee then misses the elbow drop off the top rope. Jett follows it up with a throwaway suplex that he calls the crash landing, gets the 3 count. His offense looked great here. I really enjoyed this match. 12 minutes and 17 seconds of fun in the opener.
Yeah, super fun match. Yeah, this move, if you can visualize like a guy picking a guy up for a suplex, and then as you have your opponent at like the apex of the height over your head, instead of holding him there, you just whip him up into the air, and he just lands powerbomb style on his back. That's what this finisher was. I also have to note, because this is a theme for the rest of the show, at one point, we have a low blow here, blatantly in front of the official.
Oh.
The referee does not budge. He's looking right at it. He does not call it.
Nobody
and we
cares
see this
all night long.
So weird. Like in ECW, I feel like John Finnegan would have reacted with more being more offended by this than there's one referee we'll get to later on who seems to at least be like thinking this isn't a legal move. But yeah, that was weird. Otherwise, though, super fun opener.
We get highlights of the Cruiserweight Tag Team Championship tournament, and I hear the voice of Mike Tenay, and I'm immediately angry that he's not on the broadcast here. Where is Mike Tenay?
Well, remember Mike Tenay had that bizarre run as this like really like prick heel interviewer during the Russo era. It's one of those things I completely forgotten about, and someone had recently posted. It might have been on the WCW Deep Cuts Twitter account, which is just an amazing treasure trove of stuff. But it was Mike Tenay like interviewing Medeja and like basically saying it was her fault that she got beat up by something. Like it was just horrible. But Tenay, like I don't know if this was during that time or not. But yes, we get this video package, which we see the bracket for like a millisecond. And on one side of the bracket, it is an unmasked Rey Mysterio and Billy Kidman taking on Johnny Swinger and Jason Lee, not the Jason Lee from current Dragon Gate, who probably wasn't even alive at this point, but some other guy named Jason Lee. Then you had Evan Courageous and Shannon Moore of 3 Count taking on Jamie Noble and someone named Scotty O. I have no idea who that is. Then on the other side of the bracket, which I do recall watching this match, Elix Skipper, Primetime, and Kid Romeo versus Air Paris and Air Styles.
Yes, AJ Styles.
Yes, AJ Styles had a few matches in WCW at this point. Was an NWA Wildside regular. He was on, like I said, the last ever edition of Thunder. But then the other, the bracket was filled out with the Young Dragons against Kwee and Mike Sanders.
Like mediocre Mike Sanders or above average Mike Sanders, something horrible.
Exactly. The mouthpiece of the natural born thrillers. So the brackets filter out to Kidman and Rey Mysterio versus Primetime Elix Skipper, who they just referred to only as Primetime, and Kid Romeo, who I had very few memories of. I saw this show live on pay-per-view, but it's been a long time since I've watched or thought about late stage WCW other than anything for this podcast. Kid Romeo physically was they went out and got a guy that was a cruiserweight version of what The Rock physically looked like. That was the whole thing here, but he danced like Alex Wright. Just kind of, I guess, the best way to describe him.
Yeah, I didn't get Kid Romeo here. I didn't have many memories of him. I had to go Wikipedia to see where'd he come from and what happened to him. And,
he was in the 2000 Best of the Super Junior tournament in New Japan Pro Wrestling. He had matches in New Japan and some in 99, a bunch in 2000, I think even a few in early 2001. And then he was after WCW died, I think he got one dark match for the WWF. And then he just sort of floated around. He was on a few of the TNA weekly pay-per-views. And then at a certain age, he was no longer Kid Romeo. He was just Romeo. I don't know if Lord Alfred Hayes was confused by that. But he, I believe the last match, according to the Cage Match website, the last match he had was, I believe, in 2008.
So in this match, this is for the Cruiserweight Tag Team titles. And
hideous belts, by the way.
Horrible belts. Ray is by far the most popular guy in this match.
Yes.
Great offense by Mysterio. Lots of bouncing
no mask,
around.
by the way.
No,
Ray
no
comes
mask.
out with a a half mask version of his old mask, takes it off when the match starts. He is wearing like brown velvet pants, jacked to the gills, and he's Rey Mysterio, so he's awesome.
Yeah, he looked great. Head scissors, taking Skipper over the top to the floor. We're told, yes, and this is the part where we're told that Kid Romeo has had extensive tours of Japan. At the time, this did not sound true to me, but I knew that you would confirm that, so I'm glad you did.
Yes. Yeah, it was one of those things where like I looked up Kid Romeo kind of like you did just to get a sense because I didn't remember a lot about him. And I saw that. So then when Tony said it, I'm like, oh, yeah, this is not Tony saying this is the greatest night in the history of our sport.
Yeah, I thought it was like completely BS because I hadn't gone and looked this up yet. Yeah. I literally wrote, I need Adam to confirm. So I'm glad you did.
Well, at this point then, and you'll describe it, we get one of the most impressive spots, maybe the most impressive thing we'll see all night, right after Tony says this.
So all four men are on the ramp. And Ray whips Skipper towards Kidman, who hip tosses him off the ramp onto Romeo on the floor. So Ray and Kidman are on the stage. They run, leap off the stage, hitting Romeo and Skipper on the concrete floor. Kidman's crossbody almost overshot Romeo, and he crashed into the rail. It was crazy. This was
awesome.
Super fun. Great spot.
Great spot, great camera shot of it. Obviously, it wasn't anywhere near as high, but the only thing that I can compare this to is from the ECW Open, the TV show and pay-per-view Open, where New Jack like gets a full running start and dives off the balcony, I believe, at the ECW arena, and he's just sort of flying through the air, like almost suspended in the air for a time. That's what Kidman in particular looked like here. Kidman, like you said, hits the crossbody while Ray hits the seated Thez press, and then we're back in the ring, and the faces hit a double sit-out choke slam, which I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, Romeo gets on offense here, and he's by far the worst guy in this match at this point. Everyone else,
I don't know that I would agree with that. Elix Skipper was like, he did really cool stuff, but in between the stuff, I felt like every time he was in between moves, the match was about to completely fall apart. But it didn't.
Yeah, but I don't know if Skipper if he legit hurt his shoulder here or not. But like that might have had something to do with a lot of the stuff that he was doing. But I couldn't tell if that was him selling or if he was actually hurt. Romeo goes for a pin on Kidman. And Ray breaks it up with a drop kick, which you don't see very often.
Yeah.
On the outside, Skipper starts getting in the face, yelling at a fan. And
this is so great.
This fat, nerdy guy that Scott Hudson then refers to as Fred Durst. And I thought this was hilarious.
And Scott Hudson was not great on this show. I'm not a huge Scott Hudson fan, but because a lot of his stuff it seems forced and over the top, and it seems like a guy trying to feign like excitement or concern or outrage, and it never sounds believable or legit. But here he just casually says, "Primetime is over there with Fred Durst," and yeah, I just lost it. And then momentarily afterwards, it was either him or Tony. I'm guessing it was him because Tony probably didn't know who Fred Durst was, and good for him if he didn't. But I believe it's Scott Hudson says something like, "Well, yeah, and Fred Durst isn't even a cruiserweight."
For those who don't know Fred Durst, like Tony Schiavone, Fred Durst is the singer, and I use that term loosely, for the band Limp Bizkit. So
the man who makes sounds into the microphone for Limp Bizkit.
WWF's
favorite band. If you haven't listened to this podcast before, you won't understand that reference.
No, or if you only listen to part 2 of the WWF WrestleMania 19 podcast. If you did, you're an animal. Go back and listen to part 1. What are you doing? Listen to both parts of that show.
I checked the analytics, the data, and the gap between part 1 and part 2 has only grown in recent weeks.
Stop it. No, I cannot have it.
Well into the double digits of more people having listened to part 2 than part 1.
This is completely unacceptable. This is a show you have to listen to from start to go. Listen to part 1 and part 2. I don't know who these people are that pick and choose part 2. So Kidman with a sit-out powerbomb on Skipper off the top. makes the hot tag to Ray. He just runs wild on both guys.
It's a huge crossbody, a tornado DDT, a forearm on Primetime, and then this is the point where Primetime rushes at him in the corner. Ray moves, and Primetime goes shoulder first into the post. Then we get this really cool like forward somersault off the top rope. It's hard to describe because it looks different than like a swanton bomb because he keeps everything real tight. His legs and his arms are tight to his body, but Ray hits that off the top, rolls through, and all in one motion hits a suicide dive through the ropes onto Primetime. And good God, was Rey Mysterio awesome here in 2001.
This was so smooth. Like as soon as he gets up after that senton type somersault move off the top on Romeo, he gets up and he just runs full speed across the ring and then hits Skipper with a tope on the floor, and you didn't even know he was out there. So it was absolutely a really cool move, really exciting.
If this was in a video game, you would have only had to do one button combination to make all these things happen. It was that smooth of an animation, if you want to call it that, between moves.
Romeo hits Ray with something off the top. I couldn't tell what he was trying here.
Tony Schiavone would tell you that was a flying body attack.
That's right. And Kidman then off the top hits a shooting star press to the floor on both Skipper and Romeo.
Wild. A Kid Mikaze, as they called it. And seeing Billy Kidman, he's a cruiserweight, but he's not on the small end of cruiserweights, like constantly busting out shooting star presses and then here to the floor all the way back then is wild to see.
Skipper hooks Ray's arms behind his back, suplexes him, holds him there as Romeo comes off the second rope with a leg drop. Kidman then breaks up the pin there. Ray powerbombs Romeo as Kidman hits a top rope splash, but Skipper breaks up the pin.
Almost like Power and Glory 2001 here with that combination of top rope moves, or of moves, I should say.
Skipper and Kidman, they tumble over the top to the floor. Ray then jumps off the middle of the second rope, hits a moonsault on Romeo. Romeo catches him, hits his move, which is called the Last Kiss, and
which is
gets
basically
the 3 count.
It's basically the Kensuke Sasaki Northern Lights bomb. I won't call it the snowplow because the snowplow sucked. But yes, this. First after he hits that move, they win cleanly, and then they dance. We get a dance for the ages with Kid Romeo in Primetime here. Tony says, "Save that for South Beach, Kid Romeo," and I guffawed over that. I actually thought Kid Romeo looked really good in here, considering when I first saw him, I groaned heavily and felt like we're going to be in for like a Kenny Chaos level performance from a power plant type of guy. But so the show at this point is 2 for 2. Again, there were a few rough spots, but this was really, really fun.
13 minutes, 46 seconds. And I'm like, we're 25 minutes into the show and
35 minutes.
These are 2 great matches so far. This is
also
unbelievable.
It also validated to this point, because my whole memory, and by the end of this show, we'll see how accurate that was. My memory of the early part of 2001 was that it was somewhat of a return to form for WCW, as I mentioned, after the last couple of years of Vince Russo and Eric Bischoff, just a lot of just total garbage. And I remember at the time, like, it made me, as a lifelong WCW fan, so much more sad that WCW died then, as opposed to if they had died like 10 minutes after Bash at the Beach 2000 ended.
Buff Bagwell's in the back, and he's making a documentary. And by documentary, I mean a shaky camera with a flashing recording light in the corner is basically filming Animal, Flair, and Jarrett.
Yes. Imagine if the television program The Shield was filmed by your parents in 1985 with their camcorder. That's what this is like. It's shaky. It's grainy. Full disclosure, after the first of these videos, and we get about 10 more of them, I could only listen. I couldn't watch because I was getting seasick.
Yeah, this was horrible presentation. This was terrible, hard to watch. And we're not even into the content yet. We'll get there later. Stacy Keibler comes out. She introduces the Sean and Stacy show.
Well, before she does that, we see a brief video feature And it's so quick that I can't fully grasp what's happening. It's just like a clip of what happened on Nitro or Thunder. And like Stacy comes out and she has like a stroller or something. But it's Sean Stasiak is in or is implied to be in the stroller. And are we supposed to believe that Sean Stasiak is Stacy's baby, but they're dating? I don't know. This doesn't make any more sense than I'm explaining it as. We then get the Mecca of manhood, as he's called. The Star Stasiak comes out. He
that is his full introduction.
His music has a woman yelling "Do it now" over and over again. Then he has 80s music that sounds like you would hear it during the like menu screen on Netflix for the Glow TV show. And then at that point, Tony Schiavone says, "I assume with a straight face, now that's a superstar entrance."
Ugh, he throws.
It was not.
No, he throws headshots out to the crowd.
Yes, he throws headshots out to the crowd after basically doing the worst impersonation of a Rick Rude promo you've ever heard in your life.
Oh, Stasiak is a 0. This was so lame. But thank goodness his opponent is Bam Bam Bigelow. And anyone who's listened to any of our back episodes of this podcast know we're big Bam Bam Bigelow fans and supporters here on this show.
Absolutely. And I had completely forgotten that he was still around in WCW at this point. He's clearly a little heavier because he's wearing his regular Bigelow gear, but then he's wearing a button-up sleeveless black shirt over it. But he still moves like Bam Bam Bigelow here.
Yeah, Bigelow in charge early. We get a lot of stalling by Stasiak, lots of stalling.
We get a standing drop kick from Bigelow.
Yes, a drop kick that sends Stasiak again to the outside. Stasiak eventually rams Bigelow into the steps, gets the advantage. Low blow by Stasiak right in front of the referee again, who does not care.
No, but Tony Schiavone has a line that I don't know why this made me laugh so much, but I just never heard this before. So Stasiak hits the low blow, and Tony says, quote, "He tinted his windows on that one." I had to pause the show because I was giggling so much that I could not type my notes. I don't know why it made me laugh so much, but it did, and it's doing the same thing to me now.
What did not make me laugh was Bigelow hitting a low blow of his own on Stasiak, and the ref still does not care. What is happening?
I guess I explained this in my head by telling myself that Ric Flair is the CEO of WCW in storyline, and nobody loves to throw a low blow more than Ric Flair. So Ric Flair probably just is amused by these and told all referees, let him go.
And that'll make sense because every single person in every single match is just throwing low blows all day.
Yes.
So I can get there with that logic. Diving headbutt off the top by Bigelow gets a near fall. Keebler's on the apron. She takes her hair down, takes something out of her hair, tosses it to Stasiak. Turns out it's a spray of some kind, hairspray, something. And Stasiak blinds Bigelow with the spray, hits a neck breaker, gets the pin. Stasiak wins 5 minutes, 55 seconds. It was a little sad here because you could tell that, Bigelow to me, he just didn't have it. He just doesn't, he was on the tail end of his career here.
Yeah. I mean, he could, like I said, he hit that standing drop kick, which is super impressive for a guy his size. But I mean, it was a nothing match. They clearly weren't doing anything with him. And this, really, he didn't do anything after this. The only thing that Sean Stasiak did this entire segment that was entertaining and that amused me at all was, after Bigelow gets his eyes sprayed, the match is over. Bigelow is on the floor, having the trainers trying to like flush his eyes out, and Stasiak just calmly walks over and tries to hand the trainer one of the 8x10s.
Out by the loading dock, Ernest the Cat Miller tells some woman that he's going to take care of Canyon.
Well, this is on a security camera, which I'll give them credit for this. If you're going to do backstage hidden camera segments where like the wrestlers act like they don't know there's a camera 3 feet in front of them, doing this from like security camera, like, up diagonal up in the corner looking down, that's actually a pretty creative way to do that. I would rather just not have backstage segments like that, but I thought that was okay.
Here's a backstage segment I didn't need. Skipper and Romeo put the belts on each other, and that's about it.
It was very strange. They were just like, yeah, we won. They put the belts on each other. They go to hug, and they're like, no, we don't like each other that much. We're just acquaintances, not friends. And then they leave. Okay.
Lance Storm and the Canadian Killer Mike Awesome versus Hugh Morris and Conan.
This match, I have a lot to say. It's not going to take a lot of time, but I have a lot to say about this match. Sure. First off, Hugh Morris is no longer General Rection. He is now Hugh Morris. He is wearing his old Dungeon of Doom Hugh Morris shirt with like the question marks and everything. And we are told by Tony Schiavone that Hugh Morris is the locker room leader of WCW, and he's an inspiration for all the other wrestlers. And I hear this and I'm just like, wow, when you hear all the stories later on about Hugh Morris, Bill DeMott just taking liberties with stuff in WWF a few years later, it was just wild to hear like Hugh Morris is this inspirational baby face that inspired the entire WCW locker room.
No, you might as well have told me that Rick Steiner at this point in his career was a locker room leader as he hurt people and beat them up. And
it was very weird.
Weird.
Meanwhile, Mike Awesome doesn't have a mullet, and I forgot that he didn't have a mullet at this point, and it is really strange.
Yeah, I do like the idea of this team. So Lance Storm comes out first. If I could be serious for a minute, cuts his promo. Loved it. Everyone rise for the Canadian national anthem, which does not play. Hugh Morris's music hits. He runs down. This is where I also note that he's no longer General Rection. And Conan then finally comes out. He took forever to get out.
And we hear about 2 bars of his music. It's hilarious. Like he appears. We hear like it's like they hit play and then immediately hit stop, and then there he is.
So it's all Team Canada early, and we love the little things here on this podcast. And another great example here, Storm has a cover on Morris. Conan comes in to break up the pin, but instead of getting hit, Storm stands up to avoid getting hit by Conan. He sees him coming and doesn't just stay there to take the hit. He gets up and backs off. I loved it. That's something that should come back.
He is so good. He was hands down, as someone who watched all this WCW just depressing content at the time, he was hands down the most entertaining guy of the last year or so of WCW. And even here in this match, I would say that holds true.
Conan's in. He runs wild on Team Canada until Mike Awesome cuts him off on his way out of the ring. And everything Lance Storm does it's crisp, it's intense, and it's so smooth. It's great. It's a pleasure to watch. Awesome hits Conan with a shoulder block or a forearm off the top rope. Hard to tell. Lots of double teaming by Team Canada. And then we get to see the beautiful Lance Storm dropkick, but it looks like he missed Conan by quite a while. And
he missed him because he's got too good of a vertical leap. He dropkicked over the head of Conan, and Conan, to his credit, got his hands up over his head to take some of the impact, so it wasn't a total whiff. But that might be the first time I've ever seen a guy execute a dropkick too well, and that being the reason he doesn't hit his opponent. You can't say the same thing in terms of executing a move too well when you talk about Mike Awesome moments later hitting. This was the what was the name of the guy, the football player in AWA, Les Francis or whatever his name was? Russ Francis. This was the Russ Francis splash of pile drivers. This was the worst in 35 years of watching pro wrestling, the worst pile driver I've ever seen. I don't even know how to do justice to describe this other than that there's not a camera shot in the world. We talked about on last week's podcast, how they had 75 cameras for that Shane McMahon spot where he falls 1,000 feet off the scaffolding. There is not a camera shot in the world. They could have set up a camera every 6 inches in the entire building here in Jacksonville. Not one of them would this pile driver look like it had connected remotely.
No, Awesome with a splash off the top. Conan makes a save. All 4 men are in. Morris goes up for the no laughing matter moonsault off the top rope. Storm,
which, by the way, Tony constantly calls him the laughing man in this match. Constantly.
Storm breaks it up. Awesome hits a running Awesome bomb, almost like Scott Hall's Razor's Edge,
yes,
but running corner to corner. Awesome then covers him. Conan tries to make the save, but Storm holds him outside the ring, gets the 3 count. Storm and Awesome are your winners, 11 minutes, 28 seconds.
Yeah, this match was not very good, but Lance Storm was awesome in it being Lance Storm, so it was passable enough to spend 12 minutes watching.
We see the Rhodes family getting ready in the locker room. Dusty's
security cam again.
Security cam footage, which I don't think is legal to have that in a locker room. Well, Dusty's...
It's Florida, so who knows?
Dusty claims to be eating 240 burritos because he will put Flair's face in his ass. So
yes, that is... it's even better because some guy comes in and brings Dusty what Dusty says is 240 burritos. Dusty says he's going to eat them all. Dustin says, like, we've got a match, Pop. And Dusty yells back, Ric Flair's face in my ass. That's the match. I lost. Like, the whole idea of that match is so stupid, but Dusty being Dusty's saying that.
So great.
And again, from the security camera, like static view, I lost it. Yeah. Then we go backstage again with the shaky
cam documentary with Buff Bagwell.
And I did open my eyes at this point, even though I needed Dramamine to do it, to see what Rick Steiner was wearing. Rick Steiner is wearing jeans. He's wearing an Unlimited Athletics polo. And then he is wearing what I would say is the gold standard of the pro wrestling look. He has a leather fanny pack on.
Sure does. And he says he's going to win fast. Everyone keeps talking about how Scott Steiner is paranoid because someone took out Medeja, an animal. And all I see on this show is a totally fine animal and Medeja. So yes. I don't know what he's so.
Was this like 2 years ago?
Or? Yes. Yeah, no, I don't know what he's so concerned about.
Also, just quick note, there was a group at this point which I had forgotten about called the Magnificent Seven.
Oh yes, we blew past the reintroduction in our lives of the Magnificent Seven.
Yes, which it includes Ric Flair, Jeff Jarrett, Animal,
Buff Bagwell,
Rick
Luger.
Steiner, Buff Bagwell, Lex Luger, all these guys.
And Jeff Jarrett, he makes up the 7th. Yeah,
but then alternately, Buff Bagwell calls them the Elite Group. He says this multiple times, and again, I'm like, what is going on? Is there some weird symmetry between this and what's airing on TNT in 2020? I don't know. We then get a backstage promo from the locker room of Palumbo and O'Hare, but this isn't security cam. This is like a regular camera shot, but they're looking away from it. And they say that they're going to die before they lose. And at this point, two things. I realized that Sean O'Hare and Sean Stasiak are not the same person, which I had forgotten. Which was disturbing because I had told you when the randomizer pulled this show, and I'm like, oh man, we're going to see the perfect event again. And then you're like, oh, they still have the tag titles. That's weird. And then here I realized, oh yeah, the perfect event was Stasiak and Palumbo. So these guys that were all part of the Natural Born Thrillers are not all the same person. But yes, that match with those guys against Totally Buff will be coming up later. Now we get a production error.
Yeah, I was going to say O'Hare's he's not telling you anything you don't already know.
Yes.
But no, he didn't say that. That's his character later in WWF. Okay.
Yes.
Cruiserweight
we then get
championship.
Well, we get this graphic that first it's a graphic for the Cruiserweight tag title graphic, and Tony throws some subtle shade at the person who put the graphic up by making a point to emphasize that now we move to the Cruiserweight singles title match.
Sugar Shane Helms comes out with the Sugar Babies for women dancing during his entrance.
It's the Nitro Girls.
And
It literally is the Nitro Girls. It's who he has here as the Sugar Babies. Probably the most excited I've heard Scott Hudson get at this point in the show. It's not that the Sugar Babies are out there. It's that Shane Helms is wearing tights. Before he had like baggy, like indie trash bag tights. Here he's got short tights, and this is noteworthy. I feel like Scott Hudson would appreciate the fashion corner on this podcast, I'm guessing.
The champion is Chavo Guerrero Jr. He makes his way out. We get weird crowd sweetening here. It's
well, how about
really
Chavo
loud.
with a remix of Eddie's WCW music that you loved?
Yeah, it was solid.
We caught that.
Yeah, it was good. Back and forth early, then Chavo takes his head off with a clothesline. Just brutal. Shane went for, quote, the Nightmare on Helm Street, which is his finisher, and I chuckled. That is a pretty great name.
It is a great name, and that is the final cut. That move that I referenced, that was a Kaz Hayashi move, that Big Show. I'm guessing that's Big Show was probably like hanging out with Matt Hardy at the hotel and was watching this pay-per-view, and that's where he got that move from that he tried to use at Backlash a few weeks later. We also had Chavo using a Regal stretch at this point, which they incorrectly identified as an STF, but it was the Regal stretch.
Yes, they basically called it a sloppy STF, but it was a solid Regal stretch.
Yes.
Chavo transitions to working over the leg. He puts him...
He does the Muda lock.
He does. And Chavo puts him sitting on the second buckle, and then Chavo just drop kicks him right in the face. Good looking offense here from Chavo.
At this point, I wonder if Kazuchika Okada was a fan of Chavo Guerrero at this point.
Helms on the outside, Chavo with a crossbody off the top to the floor. Nobody cared. The crowd is dead for this.
Which is interesting because they were very much not dead for the first two very cruiserweighty type of matches. That bonus match with Jason Jett and then the cruiserweight tag title match. I don't know if the previous couple of matches just took him out of it or they didn't really care about Shane Helms. But yeah, this match, and again, we'll describe the rest of it. This, to me, the best way I could describe this is two good wrestlers trying really hard to have a great match, but they're just not good enough to pull it off.
So, little flashes from Helms, but Chavo's in control. Helms then blocks a tornado DDT attempt. Another counter. Then he hits the Nightmare on Helm Street finisher, but Chavo with his foot on the ropes. Chavo's on the outside. Helms off the top rope. He hits a high fly flow to the outside on Chavo.
Yes, the frog crossbody, the high fly flow that Hiroshi Tanahashi uses to the floor, aces high, if you will, the crossbody to the floor. So this is an amazing confluence of events because Shane Helms hits this move, which is spectacular. As he's going to the top rope, the crowd is loudly chanting boring. And as he lands, Tony says, and I quote, "The fans erupt."
Yeah, they were turning up the crowd sweetening, the fake crowd noise to drown out the boring chants at this point.
Yeah, which is just, I was surprised, especially off of that dive.
Another crossbody off the top back in the ring for a near fall. Chavo crotches Helms, who lands hard. And then Helms is able to counter Chavo. He hits the Vertebreaker for the win. New Cruiserweight champion Shane Helms, 13 minutes, 57 seconds.
Vertebreaker, a super, super visually impressive move. Terrifying. Homicide used it to effect for quite a while as well. This, like I said, they tried hard. It wasn't bad, but of the three, again, I don't know if you want to call it opener cruiserweight match, but if you do, of the three cruiserweight matches, this was by far the worst of the three. It didn't connect like I think they were looking for.
More documentary garbage in the back, but Flair and Jarrett say they're not going to kiss any ass tonight. Booker T cuts a promo, tells you not to hate the player, but hate the game.
Save the drama, call your mama.
WCW World Tag Team Championship. Lex Luger is out first, part of the Magnificent Seven, like we mentioned. Then Buff Bagwell makes his separate entrance, and the team is called Totally Buffed. They're the challengers.
Can we talk for a second about Buff Bagwell's music? Because it is, well, first off, it's basically, it's every generic 80s rock song you've ever heard, and then Buff Bagwell in his Buff Bagwell voice saying things like "Buff is the stuff" and quote, "I'm totally delicious," which then, as an aside, made me think of the underrated WCW tag team of Vicious and Delicious, that being Scott Norton and Buff Bagwell.
I will not be undercutting Buff Bagwell's song underneath as we talk about it here. That is not it is dead silence while we talk about this.
Well, what if we do ever review a show that has the American Mals?
Yes, 100%. That one
needs to be there, because that's a theme song for the ages. Then Luger gets on the mic and cuts a long promo talking about how they ended the career of Bill Goldberg, taunts the fans to chant Goldberg, who is clearly not there, so that's fun. Luger does have a good line where he's basically like me and doesn't remember who the guys are that he's wrestling. He can't remember if it's a Palumbo or an O'Hare and which first name goes with which last names. Luger then says, this match won't take long, and I write, that promo sure did, though.
O'Hare and Palumbo waste no time, laying both Buff and Luger out. Super kicks by Palumbo on both, which Tony calls the jungle kick.
Yes.
Shanton bomb, which is the senton off the top by Sean O'Hare on Luger.
From a giant human being in Sean O'Hare, which is very impressive.
Oh, yeah, he leaps to the top again, hits one on Buff. O'Hare covers Luger as Palumbo covers Buff. 3 counts, still tag team champions. This was a quick squash match.
Which Scott Hudson screams, that was a squash. That was a Georgia Championship Wrestling squash. And that was again one of the good Scott Hudson lines on here. I thought, wow, this is like a Pez Whatley, Jimmy Valiant squashing the Road Warriors moment here.
Oh no! So I had to. So in looking at what happened here, we turn to Dave Meltzer's Wrestling Observer newsletter. Both Luger and Bagwell complained loudly about being asked to put over Palumbo and O'Hare, to the point where wrestlers thought that they were babies, and the way that they stormed out of the building after the meeting to go to the gym made a lot of people think that they weren't going to come back for this show. The match itself was booked for 8 minutes and is supposed to be O'Hare pinning Luger with the Shanton bomb clean. Instead, after doing the lengthy interview, which was on the script, they went into business for themselves. They did the spot where they knocked each other out and laid out for O'Hare to do his move on both of them and pin Luger in 54 seconds. Both oversold the effects of it for several minutes, including Bagwell trying to spoof his legitimate neck injury by not moving. Both
that was them doing it on their own, because that was my question of like how tasteless that was. It's very weird because they go to a video package for the next match and then they come back and Luger and Bagwell are still in the ring selling like they got killed.
Yes, both men laid in the ring motionless while people at home were watching a video package building up the Cat versus Canyon match, doing almost a caricature of being paralyzed, which came off to the fans live as a blatant exposure of the business. And then when the cameras were back on, Bagwell moved, teasing a reoccurrence of his famous neck injury. Most of the wrestlers and virtually all of the agents backstage were furious at this entire thing.
Which amazes me then that Buff Bagwell was still hired by the WWF and was put in that all-important and disastrous spot a couple months later of wrestling Booker T in that ill-fated match in Tacoma on Raw that basically was the second death of WCW.
Yeah, Bagwell was on the no list, but when Vince McMahon was reading off WCW names in front of the crowd, he actually got a big pop, and they decided to bring him in for that. So that was actually the difference.
What a fateful thing. I also, nowhere near as important, but I have to mention that I'm 99% sure that Sean O'Hare and Chuck Palumbo came out to the exact same Prodigy knockoff music that Al Snow had on the WWE Network version of ECW Living Dangerously 1998 that we reviewed.
Scott Steiner rants about DDP. We see that video package recapping Canyon and Cat. And then we finally see them totally buff leave the ring like I described. And then Canyon he rises up from the stage for his entrance. And
he looked cool here in this entrance. Chris Canyon was awesome. He's got a leather coat on. What we complain, and rightfully so, about the WWF pushing certain phrases, even back in the early 2000s, where it just drives you crazy on on a particular show. But here, the amount of times that they call Chris Kanyon a sociopath, it just drove me up a wall. But yeah, he's out here in his long, like, greenish blue velvet tights and a leather jacket. And then here comes the cat we've heard him before.
Jones.
Yeah, a human being named Miss Jones, who I have no recollection of. They're wearing matching leopard print gear. Cat comes out to the lamest dubbed, I can't even call it like generic James Brown knockoff music. It's literally elevator music.
Like, I couldn't believe that they just didn't overdub the Somebody Call My Mama song that they have the rights to, and they've had forever. Like, I don't know why they didn't overdub that. They overdubbed just a horrible version of whatever this song was. The original, I think, was just they actually had a James Brown song. So
yes. Well, can we also talk about the fact that, like, so the cat, or excuse me, Chris Kanyon has a cast on, and they explain that it is because of M.I. Smooth's head from Kanyon punching him so many times. This then brings me back to, so while Totally Buff is laid out in the ring and we see this, you're very kind in calling it a video package. They showed like a montage of clips in the span of about 12 seconds from, I think, 8 different shows, and you could not make out anything of what was happening because they showed everything so quick. But the only thing I noted here again is that M.I. Smooth, I'm pretty sure, was Ice Train, and I would have far rather seen Ice Train than a lot of the guys on this show, including Ernest the Cat Miller.
I'm glad you mentioned these video recaps because they feel so minor league compared to what the WWF was doing at this exact same time. When we look at the Backlash show that was just 5 weeks later, the WWF could always make the lamest segments look epic. And, and I immediately knew what was going on, even having not watched it in decades. And you got neither feeling when you watched any of these WCW recaps. Nothing felt epic. Everything felt lame. And you had no idea what was going on.
Yeah, it's perfectly said. A lot of these, I actually feel like I would have understood more if they didn't show it.
So Kanyon goes after Miss Jones on the stage, but Cat goes on the attack
because he's been stalking Miss Jones. They talked about, again, we saw like a nanosecond of this in that video recap, that he like stalked her in the hospital. I don't know. Go through this. Match sucked.
Yeah,
that's my review of this. You'll go into it more detail.
Yeah, back in the ring, after an electric chair, Cat rams Kanyon's face first, just in the mat 3 times, yelling, "I'm the greatest!" after each one. This is the Cat, Ernest the Cat Miller. Kanyon.
How about Tony saying that? So Cat, in the midst of making one of his comebacks, I think it was around this time, Tony says that because of the Cat's karate background, the Cat is a better puncher than Chris Kanyon.
We did get a cool move. We Kanyon on offense is always fun. He's an innovator. And we saw the outside in elbow drop. We saw Kanyon off the top with his leg on the back of Cat's head, driving him face first into the mat.
Yeah, basically a top rope, whether you want to call it a rocker dropper or a Sicilian slice. Very cool.
Kanyon cutter, and then goes to the top, but he's crotched by a karate kick from the Cat. Superplex from the Cat, got a near fall. We had a sunset flip attempt by Kanyon that gets blocked. Crotch chops and more dancing from the Cat. And then he hits what's called the James Brown elbow.
This is that time period where like WCW is desperately trying to create a people's elbow. And it never took, no matter who they had doing it. Here, the Cat being another example of this. We also had before that a very, very bad spine buster by Kanyon that I don't blame it on him. Boston Crab that didn't look particularly good. The Cat could be an entertaining guy, but that entertainment factor did not take place within the confines of the ring. He just was awkward and bad. It was very difficult to obviously it was difficult to have a good match with him, but it was also difficult for to be able to do your moves in a way that they looked good.
Kick to the face by Miller. It's called the Feliner, But Canyon's foot is on the rope. Canyon hits Cat with a weapon, and Miss Jones is now on the apron. Canyon hits the ref from behind. Cat holds Canyon so that Miss Jones can get a free shot in, but Canyon moves, and Miss Jones kicks Cat in the head.
Yeah, a big head kick, like a Muay Thai head kick. Like
Miss Jones is ready to fight, and she kicks Canyon in the head. He turns around into another feliner, and the ref counts 3. Ernest the Cat Miller wins. And when Miss Jones got into this match, the crowd got way into this finish.
Yeah.
I was really surprised and a bit disappointed in the fans.
At the finish, Scott Hudson yelled, and I quote, "Oh, what a match!" He was wrong.
Canyon, he attacks Cat after the match. Flatliner, which is his move on the Cat. Smooth then runs down to save Miss Jones. Smooth had his own entrance music and had nothing wrong with him for having Canyon broken his hand on his face. None the worse for wear here. So maybe he was attacked by the same person. Maybe Canyon was the one who attacked Medeja and Animal because there was no effects to Smooth and no effects to them either. 10 minutes, 31 seconds.
Yeah, bad.
Speaking of bad, the documentary continues with Totally Buff in the back. Buff says they're fighting, and he says, "Hey, only tape the good stuff." Dusty is on the hidden camera footage. Dusty says it's all moved down to his saddlebags now, and we're gonna get Smelly Vision out there tonight. So, U.S. Heavyweight Championship now. Booker T is your challenger against the U.S. champion, 41-year-old Rick Steiner.
Booker T, by the way, we talk about it every time that he is featured in any way on a show on this podcast. Top 5 entrance music of all time. He still has it here, but it starts with his catchphrase, "Don't hate the player, hate the game." Then Rick Steiner's music starts, and his starts with his catchphrase, "If you want some, come get some. If you don't like me, bite me." So that was a thing here where everybody's music basically started with their catchphrase, and then the music would hit.
But that's 2 catchphrases. So Steiner got 2 catchphrases at the beginning of his song.
It is, yeah. It's. I also noted the percentage of white people raising the roof.
I did as well. I said lots of white guys raising the roof for Booker T's entrance. So Rick.
Also weird to see. I had totally forgotten that they were still using like the early 90s WCW US title belt here in 2001 for Rick Steiner.
Yeah, Rick Steiner comes out wearing that belt, and he pulls out a glasses case to put his sunglasses away and protect them.
Yes. No headgear protection in this era of Rick Steiner, but he does have protection for his sunglasses.
And no fanny pack at this point. He left that in the back.
Sad.
Match starts with Rick having the ref check Booker T's gloves, but that's just a distraction to allow Steiner to jump Booker before the bell. On the outside, Steiner throws Booker into the first row, almost killing these fans.
Yes, which later on, I think we'll discover or understand that these fans are plants.
Yes.
But at the time, I was taken aback by this.
So back in the ring, double underhook into a sit-out powerbomb for a near fall. All Rick Steiner here. Rick kicks Booker in the balls right in front of the referee, who again, for the first time. Yeah.
Well, he does. He admonishes Rick, but he does not disqualify him.
He only,
referee Mickey
only
J.
threatens to disqualify him. Booker then misses a kick, and a perfect Steiner belly-to-belly here. Long chin lock by Rick. Booker then makes a comeback. He tried a spine buster, but had to muscle him up. It looked really awkward here.
Yes, I apologize to the Canyon Cat spine buster because this was significantly worse.
Booker hits the axe kick, which has been renamed to the Ghetto Blaster, which was the name that Bad News Brown used for his Enziguri finisher in WWF in the late 80s. Spinaroonie from Booker T. Steiner then grabs the ref, and pulls him in the way of the Harlem sidekick by Booker. German suplex. Steiner with a cover, but the ref is too hurt to count. Steiner's on the second turnbuckle as Shane Douglas, also with a cast on his arm.
Yeah, this was like a ghost of WCW past here. I did not expect to see Shane Douglas, who was called Shane Douglas, and then I felt like Shivani and Hudson got like an electric shock in their headsets that told them, call him the franchise. We don't call him Shane Douglas. Because then they kept calling him the franchise. And yeah, he jumps over the rail. He hits Rick with the cast. They tell us that he's had his wrist broken twice by Rick Steiner. I don't know, like at the same time, or it's like every 6 months he just gets his wrist broken by Rick Steiner. I don't recall. But at this point, Rick falls toward Booker. Booker hits the book end, which is basically the rock bottom, his Uranagi. And we have a new United States champion. It's the one title other than the cruiserweight title that's eluded Booker T throughout his WCW career. He's the new U.S. champion. This was pretty much an overbooked mess. You talked about earlier on, like Bam Bigelow being done. Rick Steiner was the definition of done here in 2001. Oh, yeah. So this, Booker T's great. He's one of our favorite guys. I think I can speak for both of us in terms of guys that we watch on this podcast. But this was not my favorite Booker T match we've watched.
No, 7 minutes, 31 seconds. And again, more horrible, shaky documentary cameras finding Animal over a laid-out Bagwell in the back. Luger's asking what's going on. Whoever is attacking the Magnificent Seven is causing dissension amongst the ranks here. We now get our two main events because the people were here to see this match.
Oh, yes.
Jeff Jarrett and Ric Flair versus Dusty and Dustin Rhodes.
Oh, yeah. This was a Dusty Rhodes crowd. Florida, obviously, a hugely important area to the history of Dusty Rhodes' career early on and all throughout. And they note that in terms of under the actual World Championship Wrestling banner, this is the first time that Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes wrestled each other on a WCW show. Tony goes into, Jim Crockett Promotions historian mode, which I love, talking about Starrcade 84 and 85, Bash 86, etc. with Flair versus Dusty. But this is the first time that they've wrestled each other on a WCW pay-per-view. I also have to mention, well, I don't know, Fashion Corner, but this is also beyond fashion. Jeff Jarrett he comes out, he has pyro shooting out of his guitar. The guitar says "Slap Nuts" on the back. And it is called over and over by Tony Schiavone, the acoustic equalizer.
Ugh.
So that's the first part of this entrance. Then we hear Ric Flair's music hit, and Ric Flair is out wearing a Hawaiian shirt, but it is a different Hawaiian shirt than the one he was wearing backstage.
That's right.
He is wearing slacks. Next to them is Animal.
Wait, hold on. Black dress slacks.
Yes.
With a black floral print Hawaiian shirt. So
yeah, black or navy blue. It appeared as though Ric Flair had just gotten off of work, did not have enough time to go home and change completely, but had enough time to wear his work pants, change into his Hawaiian shirt, and go to the Jimmy Buffett concert.
Yeah, it's like when I'm working from home and I change out of my sweatpants into my pajama pants at the end of the day. Yeah.
So this is the look for Ric Flair. The look for Road Warrior Animal is incredible. He is wearing jeans. He is wearing a shirt. Over the shirt, he is wearing a leather jacket. The leather jacket is red, white, and black, classic Road Warriors colors. It has a huge caricature, cartoony picture of him on the back. It says Legion of Doom. One sleeve is a normal leather sleeve. The other sleeve is Zubaz.
In 2001.
He's, as a man who was a part owner of Zubaz, which he was refusing here in 2001 to give up with the dream of Zubaz, taking over the country once more. Also noteworthy, Dusty had some knockoff version of the WWF American Dream song at this point.
Yeah, this
was weird.
It was a very weird song. Charles Robinson, he throws out Animal right away. Flair was teasing he wasn't going to wrestle. He decides he's going to wrestle in that outfit that we just
Which
described.
it's also, this is around that time, if you remember, a couple of weeks later, like 8 days later, the final Nitro, Ric Flair, it was said later he was self-conscious about his physique. He wrestled his final WCW match against Sting wearing a t-shirt tucked into his trunks, almost a Steve Regal, William Regal look.
The dad go back to bed look. Yeah, that's
yes, exactly. But so I'm assuming that's why he dressed like this for this match. But it was disappointing here in this epic encounter with Dusty Rhodes one more time.
I don't care what he looked like. He was phenomenal in this match.
He was. And the crowd was so fired up before the match even starts. And it's great because they start with Jarrett and Dustin, they know what the crowd wants and they're going to milk it. They're going to wait for it. But a huge Dusty chant from the fans here in Jacksonville as the match is about to begin.
Dustin in there with Jarrett, and what awesome punches by Dustin here. He's
Dustin,
so good.
Dustin Rhodes is one of the most underrated wrestlers in the modern, when I say modern, I basically talk about the 35 years that I've been a pro wrestling fan. One of the most underrated wrestlers. He was great here. In 2020, he still is great. But yes, it's again, one of those guys you kind of forgot was in WCW in the dying days.
And then Flair tags in with Dustin. We get awesome punches from Flair, some strutting. Hudson on commentary at this point cannot stop talking about how someone is going to have to kiss someone's ass. He's mentioned it over and over. It is killing me during this match.
Well, especially when we get the awesome moment where we get Flair and Dusty in the ring at the same time, and the place is just coming unglued. You could say that is really the final special moment in the history of WCW. And instead of laying out and letting the moment, this incredible moment, the decades and decades in history, I should say, between maybe the two biggest and most important names in the history of World Championship Wrestling, instead of letting that breathe and allowing that to soak in, we have Scott Hudson yelling about how someone's going to get their ass stuck in someone else's face. And
he has to yell over the fans because this is the most exciting the fans have been all night long, and they are legitimately going crazy. And it's like, like you just mentioned, take a beat. Let the fans have their moment. You don't need to yell over top of them about this.
Well, and especially if you're going to yell over top, it'd still be frustrating, but at least yell over the top about what a huge moment this is, not about the stupid stipulation.
Yeah, it's completely ruined by Hudson here. And Flair is 52 and Dusty Rhodes is 55 here. And Dusty with bionic elbows all over the place.
Flip-flop flies. He's throwing Dusty jabs. He's being Dusty Rhodes.
And everyone, it's what everybody wanted, and they got it. Flair with a low blow on Dustin, but at least this time the ref was distracted and didn't see it.
Yes. Which it's funny what I mentioned earlier about my logic for why guys could get away with it. Here, that very thin thread of logic is blown away because Flair knew that he had to have the ref distracted to be able to do the low blow. So
Flair and Jarrett keep taunting Dusty, and every time the ref puts him out, they double team on Dustin. They're working over Dustin's leg. Jarrett with a figure four. I don't know if you heard this or not, but Hudson still can't stop talking about kissing someone's ass. He can't believe it. He just can't.
But the funny thing is, like, even though it's pay-per-view, he's afraid to say kissing their ass, so he just says someone's going to kiss someone. And so that it gives it a bit of a different tinge. It also felt, because he was so hyper-focused on this, I felt like maybe someone pulled Hudson aside and like he was the only person that got told that the Fusion deal wasn't going to go through and your only chance was to impress Vince McMahon.
This is your WWF audition tape?
This felt like a WWF audition tape. And if you recall, the announce team for those few WCW segments on Raw were Scott Hudson and Arn Anderson. That's my theory, and I'm sticking with it.
So, Dustin's able to reverse the figure four. Flair on the apron, cheering on Jarrett, was phenomenal. He is so great. We talk about it in some of these 2003 matches when he's managing Triple H.
Triple H.
But
well, yeah, he's the most entertaining person out there, and he's just the guy in the corner. In this case, the guy in business Jimmy Buffett casual on the apron, and he's the most entertaining thing happening because he is Ric Flair, and you cannot deny him.
So great. Both guys tag out. Dusty and Flair are back in again. Dusty runs wild on both Jarrett and Flair. Flair is he's bouncing around for Dusty. Jarrett's bouncing around for Dusty, making him look like just $1 million here. It was awesome. Dusty knocks Flair down, sets up for an elbow drop, and Flair screams from the mat, "No!" And Dusty nails the elbow drop. Jarrett then makes the save. Jarrett hits a low blow on Dusty. The ref saw it. Surprise, does not care. Flair and Jarrett go to put figure fours on the Rhodes, but Rhodes kick off Flair and Jarrett collide.
This almost reminded me of the WWF Most Unusual Matches tape with the whole sleeper spot in that tornado tag match.
Sure.
Not quite as cool, but it was fun.
And Dustin then pulls Flair down in what looked like a small package attempt. He ended up just muscling him down, hooking a leg, getting a pin.
Flair, we see it in the replay. Like Flair goes down for the cradle before Dustin gets him. And so Dustin kind of has to improvise. And Hudson, to his credit, in the replay, does a great job of sort of covering and kind of making up a thing as to what happened here.
The Rhodes family win. Flair bails and just screams on the ramp, "No, no," over and over. In the ring, Dustin holds Jarrett as Dusty undoes his pants, pulls them down as he stands there, pants at his knees, red brief underwear.
Well, they make a big deal about that, though, and I'm laughing because I'm like, okay, that's exactly what he wore trunks as tights for like 40 years.
Yeah, so there's just no polka dots on it.
Yeah.
Dusty then gives Jarrett what could only be called the stink face, very similar to Rikishi. And I enjoyed watching the Flair freak out while he's watching Jarrett get this stink face. Flair, I'm glad everyone's sitting down for this one. And not totally shocking. Flair was amazing. He did a phenomenal, entertaining job. Dusty was super entertaining. Dustin and Jarrett were awesome in the ring. This was super fun. 9 minutes, 58 seconds.
Yes, a very enjoyable way to spend 10 minutes, even with the dumb stipulation. A great send-off for the pay-per-view history of WCW to have those two guys, Flair and Dusty, in the ring. And then that takes us to the main event, the final match ever for WCW on pay-per-view. And the thing that I'm most shocked by as we go to this match is that they were still using Michael Buffer in March 2001.
I laughed. So I go, Michael Buffer is still doing ring announcing. They're still this company is hemorrhaging money and they're paying $15,000 for a Let's Get Ready to Rumble.
I literally have written down here on my notes on my iPad. Wait, they were still using Michael Buffer this late with them hemorrhaging money and on the verge of death. Wow. Exact quote from my notes.
So this is a Falls Count Anywhere match for the WCW World Title. Your champion, Big Papa Pump Scott Steiner, and the challenger, DDP Diamond Dallas Page.
DDP does not have his public domain version of a Nirvana song.
He does not.
Which disappoints me. Also, did you notice that they used fake crowd noise during the Let's Get Ready to Rumble?
It was so weird, the fake crowd noise all night long.
On a live show, it's so strange. We talked about it at Bash of the Beach 2000. It's no less weird here. Also, how about hearing Michael Buffer say like things other than people's height and weight in his Michael Buffer voice never gets old. Here he has a quote as Scott Steiner is coming out. Exact quote. In the company of his favorite freak, the lovely and sexy Medeja. Like in the middle of him being Michael Buffer. Just hilarious.
His introductions were the stuff of legend. Just unbelievable.
Well, also in the early days of him doing WCW, I guess it actually wasn't that early. Sometimes he clearly like had no idea who these guys were and did not care. As in the one time he introduced and I quote, Hitman Brett Clark.
So you've got Steiner and DDP in the ring, staring each other down. They start out by just spitting at each other. DDP on fire early. Page attacking Steiner on the outside. Steiner's able to gain the advantage by sending Page into the guardrail. Steiner yelling at fans was legit scary because
it was legit scary and highly entertaining. I would pay for 2 hours and 52 minutes, which is how long this pay-per-view was, of Scott Steiner insulting fans. He's yelling at these people. He loves calling people white trash. He loves calling people fat asses, and just hearing Scott Steiner say this, like you said, it's terrifying, but also absolutely hilarious.
You know, he's one of those crazy guys that it was terrifying because you had a feeling that you didn't know how insane or crazy Steiner was, and was this the time he'd actually kill a fan?
And think about Scott Steiner in this match and the presentation here. We talk about that match with Triple H that he had, like, what, a year after this?
That was
in the WWF
Royal Rumble 2003. Yeah.
So I guess a year and a half, but just the difference in presentation and how in this match, and again, you could say a lot of things wrong about WCW. Obviously, they were going to be dead 8 days later, but they went to all of Scott Steiner's strengths, which were he's a crazy person, he's a heel. You don't know if he's going to kill the guys in the ring with you. Don't know if he's going to kill the fans. And then you look at that presentation of him in that match at Royal Rumble 2003, where literally it felt like they had like a chalkboard in the back of what are all of his weaknesses, and then just said, let's exploit and accentuate all of those.
Yes, they stayed away from all those weaknesses in the build of that match and then proceeded to just exploit every single one. Steiner's got Page against the rope, and he's just clubbing him across the chest with forearms while screaming at a dude in the front row, "Come on, fat ass," over and over. This was so great. Classic Scott Steiner. They brawl into the crowd. They brawl and find a Spanish announce table that's way in the back of the first level of fans.
It's way back there. It's like behind a barricade between like the floor and the arena seats. Pedro Morales is one of the guys on commentary, which shocked me. They don't go through the Spanish table. Instead, there's another table that gets set up. They have a planted fan in a DDP shirt. Scott Steiner grabs a crutch from the fan and breaks it over DDP, which is entertaining.
Yeah, well, I mean, so this random guy is standing there on crutches. Now,
one guy in this like black void in between ringside and the arena seats.
No one on crutches would be standing there. You'd be looking for your first opportunity to sit down if you're on crutches. You're not just standing there. This whole thing was forced and completely ridiculous.
Terrible job by either that fan or WCW accommodating that fan, is there is not a chair in sight for this person who clearly has a serious lower body injury.
Steiner breaks the crutch across Page's back. Page then calls for the other crutch. The dude throws in the crutch and he breaks it over Steiner's back. Page lays Steiner across a random table that is not the Spanish announce table. It is next to the random table. DDP then falls off the guardrail, driving an elbow into Steiner, putting him through that table, and he can pin him there. It's false count anywhere, but it's only a 2 count. Steiner then, as they make their way back to the ring, he takes like a plate sign thing that from a quote fan, and then he pie faces the fan after that, and then hits DDP with this plate sign thing that explodes.
Well, no one can convince me that this fan is not Paul London.
I literally wrote here, I swear that quote fan looked like Paul London. So
the weird thing was that the fan looked like late stage Paul London. Like Paul London at this point would have been like 15 probably.
Yeah,
but
it's so funny.
It looks exactly like him.
We both have that written down. Because I immediately thought that was Paul London. Wow, and so Steiner got a little cut from being hit with that as well, and he's got this trickle of blood on his forehead, and somehow looks even more terrifying.
Yes. Well, and then at this point, They get back in the ring, and Scott is bleeding, but he's doing push-ups and he's yelling to the fans how he's just warming up. And I'm just like, Scott Steiner is such a great man here. So awesome.
Bear hug by Steiner. Shivani's talking about squeezing the life, but all I hear during this bear hug is the voice of Gorilla Monsoon saying it's too low. Why bother? You're not going to get him that way. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go back to our Royal Albert Hall episode and hear all about Monsoon getting angry at misapplied bear hugs.
Yes, it's quite great. This spot that you're talking about here in this match came moments after Scott Steiner basically threatened to murder Nick Patrick.
Steiner with a belly-to-belly overhead suplex for a near fall. Page then fights back a little, but another belly-to-belly by Steiner.
At this point, Scott Hudson is talking about the Magnificent Seven like it's like the NWO tearing down WCW. He talks about how DDP is the last hope for WCW against the Magnificent Seven and the tyrannical reign of Ric Flair. Just laying it on a little too thick here.
DDP finally fights back. He goes for the diamond cutter, but Steiner counters, kicks DDP with a low blow, again in front of the referee, but it's actually okay to do that in this match because it's false count anywhere.
Yeah.
Steiner then, he's shoved chest first into the buckles. He turns around and DDP hits the diamond cutter. Ref counts 2 and gets pulled out of the ring by Rick Steiner.
At this point, I'm waiting for the credits to roll and find out if this was like Gato's tryout to be a booker here. Because this felt like... And again, biggest New Japan fan you're ever going to find. This felt like some of the worst tendencies of the longtime New Japan booker Gato here in 2001 WCW.
DDP with a plancha over the top rope wipes out Rick Steiner.
And a baseball slide dropkick right before that. DDP was watching those first few matches.
He grabs the ref and brings him back into the ring. The crowd is chanting for Goldberg at this point. Rick on the apron. DDP throws Scott into Rick. After they collide, DDP rolls up Scott, only a 2 count. When Steiner kicked out, DDP fell onto referee Nick Patrick. It's false count anywhere, so I don't know why we need ref bumps here.
Yes.
We get him anyway. Steiner then nails DDP with the title belt to the head, and Diamond Dallas Page is bleeding from this belt shot.
All over the place. He is gushing. The blood is pooling on the mat. I don't know if the belt actually cut him or if he bladed after he got hit, but either way, I assume this is a deeper cut than they were going for because this was bad.
Ref counts, but Page gets the shoulder up at 2. We get the Steiner recliner, Scott Steiner's version of the camel clutch applied. DDP is a bloody mess, pools of blood on the mat like you mentioned, his face completely covered in blood. DDP makes the ropes for the break. Rick Steiner then with a cheap shot on Page. Madeja, who was attacked days earlier, totally fine.
Yes.
She's with the ref. Steiner then hits DDP with a pipe in the ribs multiple times.
Yeah, lead pipe, which I guess this was hit. At the time, Triple H was already using the sledgehammer. So in WCW, you had Scott Steiner using the lead pipe.
Another Steiner recliner. DDP passes out. The ref calls for the bell. Scott Steiner's victorious. Still your WCW champion. 14 minutes, 14 seconds. After the match, a couple more pipe shots to a down DDP.
They lay the University of Michigan flag over him as they celebrate.
And then the show goes off the air. The final pay-per-view for WCW.
Before it goes off the air, we get like a random video recap of everything we just saw, which just felt out of place and strange for this time period. But yeah, the final WCW pay-per-view basically goes off the air with the Steiner brothers standing tall, which is not something I have any recollection of, but that did in fact occur.
So, going into this show, I was ready to hate it at the levels of a Bash at the Beach 2000. However, this show tried to correct wrongs of the past few years of WCW by not overbooking the show, trying to push the young new talent, and it made for a really enjoyable show. But you could say at this point, it was exactly too little, too late for the company as a whole.
Exactly. And that's what I spoke to earlier. And that rewatching this, it did confirm a lot of what I had felt back then and kind of had carried over the last 20 years or so, but not really, gone back and watched these shows, which was that it was sad that WCW died at a point where, like you said, this show was in a lot of ways a microcosm of the first 3 months of 2001, where they were actively trying to right the wrongs, but it was just too little too late. They had damaged the brand, if you want to call it that, too much. They had lost, they had just blown way too much customer fan loyalty, and it was going to be too hard to get it back. Who knows if the Fusion deal had gone through. But the thing you can say about this show, while it wasn't perfect, it at least felt like WCW, which 99 and particularly 2000, for a long time WCW fan, it just didn't feel like even the company, that you had enjoyed. Whereas this, at least, it did feel a little bit like WCW, the good elements.
Best match for you on the show?
I would have to go with one of the two opening matches.
Me too. Yeah,
it's honestly a coin flip to me between the tag titles and the Jett Kwee match, the cruiserweight tag title match, I should say. I almost would go with Jett versus Kwee, only because that match should not have been that good. I have no problem believing that Rey Mysterio and Billy Kidman could carry two decent but not great guys to a really good tag match, but I think I'm actually going to go with Jason, Jett, and Kwee.
I'm going to agree with you because it's a match that took me from no expectations, and really I had an adverse reaction to just seeing Kwee, to enjoying the match as a whole. So yeah, that those first two matches by far were the best matches on this show. The worst match for you?
Oh man, I'm going to go with Canyon and the Cat. Canyon and the Cat, because that was longer. Stasiak and Bigelow was not good at all.
That's my choice. Stasiak
is a total nothing, but Canyon and the Cat, I don't like the Cat. The story was stupid. I had to hear them call Canyon a sociopath 400 times. It overstayed its welcome. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Stasiak and Bigelow. Stasiak is just such a zero. Sucked the life out of a show that was going that I was enjoying. So yeah, definitely that was the worst match for me. But overall, a good show. The WCW GREED, the final show. A strong finish for a company that would go out of business just a week later. So with that, I want to remind everyone that all of the episodes that we referenced in today's show, those older WCW shows, those two early 2000 WWF shows, that Royal Albert Hall show from the early 90s, you can listen to all of those in our archives. The entire back catalog of this podcast is available at wrestlingatrandom.com. And if you follow us on Twitter and Instagram at WrestleAtRandom, we will tell you every single Thursday what that week's show will cover. And Twitter is the place to interact with this show. We have a great time interacting with the listeners, and we love hearing from you, and we will try to reply to every single comment we get. So please, if you want to interact with the show, make sure you do that via Twitter at WrestleAtRandom. If you are not on Twitter, because it can be a cesspool, I totally understand that as well. We would also like to hear from you. wrestlingatrandom@gmail.com is the email address. You can send us your comments there as well. All of those links are available in the back catalog, like I mentioned, at the website wrestlingatrandom.com. So please make sure that you subscribe to this podcast. That helps others find the show, and we rely on you to tell your wrestling fan friends, tell your friends that used to be wrestling fans about the show. We rely on your word of mouth.
And tell the people in your life who either you don't like anymore, or they don't like you, or maybe the feeling is mutual, but they still like wrestling. I'm not so arrogant as to believe that the show can mend friendships, but I mean, they'll still enjoy it, so tell them.
Yeah, challenge accepted. Give it a try. And with that, I want to thank you for joining us, Adam.
Definitely. Thank you, Jeremy. And I just want to mention again, we talked about favorite matches. I think my favorite moment on this show, even though Scott Hudson tried to ruin it, was Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes tagging in, and just that crowd and them soaking in that one more time.
Absolutely. I want to thank everyone for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.